Okay, so Danny is a friend of the channel. Everybody knows Danny. And Danny, you recently talked to Frank Turek live at LSU, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so actually, I'm a student at LSU. I'm a graduate student there. And I was on my way back from class, and I always pass by this area where a lot of Christians tend to congregate. They like pass out flyers and they're willing to talk to you. But I saw a larger group, and I went by them and I saw Frank Turek live or something like that. And they asked me, "Do you know Frank Turek?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, we know. Well, I know who Frank Turek is."
Yeah.
And the woman that was telling me about it tried to run a moral argument right then and there's like, "Do you think things are wrong and there's something wrong with the world? It's unstable." She tried to already like she did the Turek thing. I'm like, "Yeah, I think things are wrong." And she's like, "Oh well, are you a Christian?" I'm like, "No, but I know he wrote the book Why I'm Not an Atheist." Right? Or
Mm,
why I'm not doing it. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I'm sorry. And
right.
she was like surprised that I knew being an atheist. But I'm like, yeah, I'll pop in. But that's kind of what happened. It was actually by accident that I came across Turek.
Were you planning on going up and asking a question?
Yes, but I had to listen to the entire hour and 45-minute lecture of apologetics, and
Oh,
not like the
boy.
kind of like the starter level apologetics. But I didn't enjoy any of the arguments. It was pretty usually, pretty bad arguments. But what was enjoyable is that I saw everyone so passionate around me. They took out their notebooks. They were taking notes. They tried to take notes at least. He talks really fast.
Right.
But everyone was super interested in what he had to say. And let me just say, I don't think Frank Turek is a very good Christian thinker, or sorry, philosophical role model, if you will. Like he's not high tier, but he's really good at communicating. He's really good. His humor is not that bad for a crowd. You're basically a church crowd. So people really were engrossed in what he had to say.
Nice. All right. So let's go ahead and play this. Let's see what happens here. Here we go.
John Paul.
This
Yeah,
is a little
Frank, what's your name?
cutie.
Hey, Frank, I'm Danny.
Say again?
Danny.
Dan?
Danny.
Danny, go ahead.
Yeah. And just for warning, I suppress the truth and unrighteousness. I'm an atheist, so bear with me. Okay, I have to stop it already there. That was supposed to be a joke, and let me tell you, the way that he looked at me when I said that, it was the most straight face I've ever seen. Like he was worried about for my soul. Like it was not funny to anyone in the crowd. Look at the crowd right now. There, I see
Not
one
a single person is even smiling. It's
no one liked it, right? And it was you could tell these people were really uncomfortable.
yeah.
I kind of forgot because on YouTube it's very common to come across atheists and all this stuff, but I'm like a kind of a unicorn in this room, right? And the joke fell completely flat.
Hilarious.
I have a question about earlier you said that good and evil were somewhat codependent, that in order to have a concept of good, you also had to have a concept of evil. Recognize.
To know what evil was, you had to know what good was. You could know good without evil, but you can't know evil without good.
All right. Okay.
Right.
So having established that, so I think what he said there was, confusing and probably gibberish. I didn't want to explore that, but what I was trying to do is set this up. He thinks that you need to understand one of the sides to understand the other side. So I was going to draw a parallel where, okay, to understand, if you're saying that if I need to know, um, if I know evil, then I must have a concept of what not evil is, what good is. Well, why doesn't the same thing work for design? If you know,
Right.
right? So we get into that. Or ponder your design argument. If you think God is the creator of all things, that means everything is created, everything is designed. So what are you using to compare a design thing versus an undesigned thing to recognize that something like DNA is actually designed?
Yeah, because in every other instance we see genetic code, we know it always comes from a mind. So, for example, if you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, John loves Mary, you don't say, well, the crabs did that, right? Or the waves lapped up against the sand and made John loves Mary in the sand. We know how that had to be an intelligent being, right? This is why when we train our our satellites out into the atmosphere. We're looking for certain patterns in the radio waves. This is called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. If we get a certain pattern, we'll know there's intelligent life out there, because natural laws themselves don't create the kind of what is known as specified complexity that a message is. So we know that messages always come from minds, and when we see in a living thing a message that's 3.5 billion letters long in every one of your 100 trillion cells, we go, intelligence.
But I think the weight of my question.
Yeah, so he definitely misunderstood my question there. And I don't think he was, I think the blame partly lies with him. But one of my mistakes was I just said the term DNA.
Right.
If I had not said DNA, he would have not done any of that, right? What I should have just said, what's the kind of undesigned thing that you use to as a model for contrasting design versus undesigned, you know? And if I just left it at that, then he would have not done this, right? But it's kind of like they run the script as soon as they hear design, DNA, Y.
It's a code. It's a code.
That's the last thing I wanted, but yeah, he completely missed the question. So, but it's a good thing that I rephrased the question more simply. So eventually, it seems like he gets it. But let's watch.
And I mean, do you think there's anything that hasn't been designed? Anything?
You mean anything in the space-time continuum?
Right? Anything in the universe. The cosmos was created by God, so it follows that everything in the cosmos was created by God and designed. So there's nothing that you compare to say that something's designed versus is undesigned.
Well, no, because you know that nature by itself will take things to disorder. Like, for example, nature will take a building like this and turn it into a pile of bricks, but nature will never take a pile of bricks and turn it into a building.
Yeah, so that was a very tricky, I mean, using the term disorder, saying that nature produces disorder, like, the last thing I wanted to do was engage with that because the term disorder is nebulous.
Right, exactly.
I don't know what he meant by that. So that was like a tricky answer. You know, one thing you have to keep in mind, this is a Q&A. I'm not debating him. Right. So, and I'm trying to grant as much as I can and not get bogged down in all the terms. So that was a you know, kind of a curveball. But yeah, I don't know if you had anything to say before we go on.
Yeah, it seems like it's just kind of throwing out kind of pre-written responses. I mean, these are probably, he's fielded questions like this probably hundreds of times, but he's kind of not exactly addressing what you're saying. Let's see what happens next.
Yeah, and we'll I do address this, so let's see what happens, what transpires.
What did God create? What?
Did God create all natural forces, natural laws, natural...
Yes, I think God created the natural forces and sustains them. Yeah.
Okay, so those are created things, they're designed things, so that you can't use that as a model for an undesigned thing.
Well, I think the fact that natural laws are so precise and consistent and are fine-tuned, that is more evidence of a divine being. But the fact that those natural laws don't create specified complexity, it would require more intelligence to come in and create a specified complex thing like a cell.
Sorry, ma'am.
So that's just what he just said there was like really unjustified, but this is how he should have seen it. An analogy would be this: if I used a tool like a hammer to accomplish some aim, right? Then whatever I've made is going to be designed by me. This even though I've used something else to make it, right?
Right.
So that's what God is with respect to natural laws, right? If there are natural laws, physical constants, etc., that's just God's hammer, right? And so whatever is the product of that is going to be designed, which is why it's kind of weird to use the term disorder, right? If God creates the natural laws, that's God's hammer, and then what follows from that is disorder, then I'm really confused, right? Because I don't know what sense of the term he's using disorder. It seems like there's a contradiction there. So yeah, there's the first problem.
Not understood your answer. Is there anything that you think that exists today in the cosmos that's not created or anything that's undesigned?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. There are things...
Anything in the cosmos. Anything. atoms?
I'm trying to understand the direction of your question here, because if we go outside right now and we see dirt out there,
God created that.
well, God created the planet, but the dirt may be in such a configuration that the natural laws working on it have made it just be in a random way. But if we went out there and
You see, if you translate that, listen to my analogy where I use a hammer to create something, God uses natural laws to create something or establishes order, right? It just seems weird for him to say that God's hammer created something random, right? That God's natural laws, set of natural laws, produced something random. I just don't know what he would mean by random there, similar to the problem with what he meant by
Well, it's
order.
not. It's definitely not random. Random. I mean, like it has no cause or it can't be predicted. I mean, like I heard someone earlier today. We were talking about this, and they were talking about like dropping a bunch of rocks on the ground, and they called that random. That's not random at all, right? All that is ordered, and the orientation that they're going to fall and the pattern they're going to make is all going to be dictated in an orderly fashion with regards to those natural laws that God has made. It's not random at all, right?
Right, and the only other sense of random is going to be undesigned, but then that'd just be false, right? Sometimes we use the word random to refer to unintended. That I just randomly did that, right? I don't have a reason. I didn't have like some kind of desire for why I did
Right.
one over or the other. So no sense of random works there. So he's just kind of, again, it seems like he's just contradicting himself here.
Yeah, that sense is definitely not going to apply to God. Okay,
Right.
so let's see what else he says now.
and the dirt was pressed into bricks and there was a wall built around the tree, we'd go, okay, that dirt has had intelligence put on it in order to create this wall. So we can still tell design, even though if everything is designed, we can still tell design from an illustration like this, because we could see dirt left to itself.
You see how he kind of like paused there? He said we can still tell design from, and then I think he was about to say not design, but you've already said, you and him have already established that everything is design.
Yeah, if he took back what he said earlier, he would have had to say you can still infer design from the randomness, right? But that doesn't
Right.
make any sense, right? It just seems he had to stop there. But that's a good insight. Yeah.
Doesn't create a wall, but dirt put into brick form can create a wall if you put intelligence on
I
it.
think the way I'm interpreting your question is that we can tell when humans interact with the world, but in terms of God
So my audio cut out there at the event. What I said there is like, okay, what you're doing is you're creating ways for how we can differentiate human intervention versus non-human intervention.
Right.
Right. That's fine. Right. We have all sorts of rich background information about what kinds of things humans do and how they behave and the kind of marks they leave on the environment. Right. So that's the problem, is that we know that there are things that humans don't affect, and we know there are things that humans do affect. But in the case, the problem with the God hypothesis is that God affects everything. Right. So the way that you come to inferences about human stuff, right, that's going to be very different from the way that you come to know that God intervenes, right? And you can't use the way that you come to design inferences with respect to humans. You can't use whatever that methodology is for determining what sorts of things are designed by God.
I wonder what he'd say if you just asked him, like, if you look at a grain of sand, how do you determine that it's designed? Because you think it's designed, right? Look at the sun, how do you determine that's designed? Because he thinks that's designed too, right?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, the dirt. Yeah, you stand. Yeah, that would have been a really good question to ask in that case. Yeah.
So that kind of gets to the heart of what you're asking. Okay, let's continue.
interacting in the world, there's no way to tell because everything serves as God's creation.
Yes, everything is God's creation, but we can see where, in fact, what you can do is you can take the natural laws, which atheists don't explain. In fact, who was it? Stop me. Paul Davies from Arizona State University, an agnostic. In 2006, wrote an editorial in the New York Times, said, taking science on faith. And basically,
You see, he knows a trick that teachers and lecturers, speakers, when you don't know the answer to a question, answer a different question.
Right.
That's the rule here. And I bet a lot of people ate it up because he sounds sophisticated, saying that he knows some kind of editorial or journal where some fancy scientist said something else pretty fancy. And so
he's citing the guy by name, his university, the newspaper. It's like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about.
Right. And so it's a pretty good rhetorical move. If it was in a debate, I probably would have just cut him off there or something. I'm like, this is not relevant. Can you just answer my question? But again, I'm not in that circumstance, so I have to hear him out here. But in my head, I don't know if you can really look into my eyes. You see, I'm just like waiting for him to finish.
He was saying, where do the laws of nature come from? And everybody who was an atheist or an agnostic wrote to him and say, we don't ask questions like that. Stop asking questions like that, because the natural laws that drive and govern the universe seem to have a designer behind them. And so we agree there's a designer behind them, except the atheists don't want to ask that question. Why do the natural laws exist? But the natural laws do the same thing over and over again. They don't create specified complexity, just like they don't create our illustration of a wall around a tree out here. So we can tell design, even if everything is ultimately at its foundation design.
I was sort of granting that everything was designed, but thanks for your time.
Okay.
Yeah, it was such a mess. So the first part of what he said was atheists don't explain this and that and that. They don't. I'm like, well, look, we're just starting from the fact that, yeah, there is an explanation. God is the explanation from the natural laws. So that's what I was alluding to. I'm like, yeah, I was sort of granting that you didn't have to go into, how do we explain the laws of nature? And then towards the end, he sort of conceded that everything is ultimately designed, but then wanted to make this distinction between like ultimately designed and like designed plus or something like that. And I knew that if we were going to get into that distinction, I would have hogged the mic and it would have been just a debate. So I think
you don't want to get just you don't want to just get pulled off the mic literally, right? I mean, you're kind of just being respectful, so that's cool.
Yeah, and there were a lot of people waiting behind me, but yeah, that was my interaction with Frank.
Anything happened after?
So, I think there were people leaving, but I did not. They usually applauded after, but I felt like, and this could just be one of those things where like my biases and my psychology is at play, but it seemed like to me I didn't get the kind of applause that the other questioners got, because everybody, I was the first atheist on the mic. I think I really it scared the crowd in some kind of way, not necessarily by my argument, just the fact that I existed as an atheist.
Look at this guy in the ball cap, in the olive ball cap behind you. Look at that look. He's watching you like he suspects you're a shoplifter and he's a convenience store clerk. Look at him.
Yeah, like I belong in a zoo or something. But so I went outside and the event ended soon after, and I kind of walked around. Everyone kind of looked at me that had heard me, but no one approached me. No one was like, I heard what you said there, or I want to talk to you about this. There was nothing like that. So that's another interesting thing. I don't know how I don't think they took it well. Maybe they didn't understand the objection, because it's not one of the reasons why I think Frank was stumped right is you don't hear this objection very often.
Yeah, there's probably a lot of people whispering, like, the atheist, there he is, that's him. That's the guy.
Yeah, because this is deep South, so very religious community. But that pretty much sums it up.
Well, I mean, thanks for coming on, and it's always interesting when one of us kind of has a real life interaction with some of these people. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Tom.